Do you remember the African-American Christmas side dishes no one makes anymore? They once filled holiday tables with soul, warmth, and the smell of food made from love and labor. When did we stop cooking the dishes that carried our history home? Collard greens with smoked ham hocks were the heart of Christmas cooking in countless African-American homes. The greens simmered low and slow for hours, their earthy scent filling the kitchen long before dinner was ready. Ham hocks gave them depth, salt, and smoke, the kind of flavor that came only from patience and thrift. Every bite told a story of making something rich from what little you had. The pot itself was a gathering place, stirred by mothers, aunts, and grandmothers who knew the rhythm of seasoning by heart. These greens were not just food, they were a blessing on the table, a wish for good fortune in the coming year. In many families, a pot of greens sat beside cornbread and turkey, representing money, luck, and perseverance. During hard times, ham hocks were often saved or traded for, treated like gold. The aroma of collards became part of Christmas itself, a signal that family was near and that celebration could still be soulful, even when pockets were thin. Cooking them meant remembering those who came before and honoring the work it took to put a meal together. Greens were a sermon in a pot, humble ingredients turned sacred through care. Sweet potato biscuits were soft, golden, and kissed with just enough sweetness to make them feel special. They were the kind of side that showed up in baskets wrapped with cloth, still warm from the oven. The dough was simple, mashed sweet potatoes, flour, and a little butter. But the hands that made them turned them into something almost holy. Sweet potatoes added color and sweetness, the kind that lingered in the air when you opened the oven door. They were often brushed with butter and stacked high beside glazed hams or roasted chicken. These biscuits spoke to the ingenuity of home cooks who stretched ingredients and still made everything taste like comfort. At Christmas, they became a soft reminder of care. Food meant to hold you together. They were served to guests as a sign of pride and to children as a sign of love. Even in lean years, someone always found a way to make a batch. The sweetness was a celebration in itself, something earned and shared. Their scent alone could fill a room with warmth, carrying a legacy of home, patience, and heart. Cornbread dressing with sage and gizzards was never written down. It was remembered. The smell alone could pull everyone into the kitchen before the pan even left the oven. The dressing was moist, peppery, and full of flavor that came from slow-simmered broth and scraps of meat that no one wasted. Every piece of gizzard, onion, and cornbread crumb had purpose. Women learned it by watching their mothers crumble bread by hand, stir broth until it felt right, and season not by measure but by memory. The sage gave it that unmistakable holiday taste, earthy and warm, tied to the idea of family coming home. This dish carried the spirit of resilience, using every bit of the bird and turning it into something worth celebrating. It stood proudly beside the turkey, sometimes outshining it. In church kitchens and home gatherings alike, pans of dressing were baked in iron skillets and passed down the table like heirlooms. The sound of the first spoon breaking through the crust was enough to hush a room. This was Christmas in its truest form, made from scratch, filled with care, and meant to feed both body and soul. Mustard and turnip greens mixed together made a tangy, peppery side that brought life to every plate. They were picked fresh from gardens behind the house or given by neighbors who always grew too much. Cooking them was a slow, loving process, cleaning, chopping, and simmering until tender with a pinch of salt and something smoky for depth. The combination of mustard and turnip greens balanced sharpness with comfort. Their flavor was bold, almost defiant, like the people who cooked them. These greens told a story of survival through simplicity, a reminder that good taste does not need wealth. At Christmas, they cut through the heaviness of rich meats and gravies, refreshing the palate and grounding the meal. Each bite held the brightness of vinegar and the bite of pepper, something sharp to remind you of life's strength even in hard times. Every family had its own way to cook them, some with a bit of onion, some with fatback, and some just with faith. The pot of greens sat at the back of the stove, bubbling steady like time itself, carrying the scent of home and history. Glazed carrots with molasses and brown sugar were once the crown jewel of Christmas sides. Before canned vegetables and store-bought glazes, these carrots gleamed on every holiday plate. The slow simmer of molasses and butter gave them a caramel richness that coated each bite in sweetness and shine. The brown sugar melted into the glaze, creating something that felt both simple and luxurious. It was the kind of dish that reminded families that even humble roots could taste like gold. Kids loved it because it was candy in disguise, while grown folks loved it because it felt like tradition. These carrots weren't about fancy presentation. They were about love cooked into every spoonful. For many Black families, molasses was more than flavor. It was a memory of survival, a sweetener when sugar was scarce. That made these carrots more than decoration. They were gratitude on a plate. The scent of molasses bubbling in the pan filled homes with warmth, a sign that celebration had begun. Today, the dish has faded, but for those who remember, its sweetness still lingers in memory like a song you never forget. Macaroni pie, or southern baked macaroni, was the soul of comfort in one bubbling pan. Forget the boxed kind. This was real macaroni, dense, creamy, and rich with evaporated milk, eggs, and sharp cheddar cheese. It was made to feed a crowd, baked until golden on top and firm in the center. Every family had their own version, passed down through generations, some adding a dash of mustard or paprika, others folding in onions for flavor. For Christmas, this dish sat proudly next to the ham or turkey, warm enough to melt your worries away. It was a dish of abundance, not because it was expensive, but because it stretched what you had into something that felt whole. Stirring that thick cheese sauce by hand was an act of care, something done with patience and pride. The macaroni pie symbolized celebration, hospitality, and a love of making something perfect out of the ordinary. The sound of a spoon scraping the crusty edges was as comforting as a hymn. Even now, its scent can bring back a lifetime of family gatherings, laughter, and full hearts. Fried cabbage with bacon fat was never glamorous, but it was always good. It started as a way to stretch meals, turning a simple head of cabbage into something hearty and rich. The sizzling sound of bacon fat hitting the skillet was the beginning of flavor itself. When the cabbage went in, the kitchen filled with a smoky, savory aroma that made mouths water. Seasoned with salt, pepper, and maybe a little onion, it became one of the simplest yet most satisfying sides on the table. For Christmas, it sat alongside the big dishes, greens, dressing, sweet potatoes, holding its own through sheer honesty of taste. Cabbage was cheap and plentiful, but what made it special was the way it was cooked, with care, attention, and a little leftover bacon grease from breakfast. Every bite carried the taste of thrift and wisdom, proof that nothing in a good kitchen goes to waste. It was food that hugged you from the inside, a reminder that love can taste smoky, crispy, and full of soul. Black-eyed pea salad carried luck into the new year before the clock even struck midnight. Served cold, it was tangy and refreshing, a rare contrast to the heavy holiday spread. The peas were cooked tender, then mixed with diced peppers, onions, and vinegar dressing that danced on the tongue. For many, it was more than a side dish. It was a ritual of hope. In African American homes, black-eyed peas symbolized prosperity and renewal, a tradition passed down from ancestors who made meaning from what they had. Preparing them for Christmas meant faith in what was coming. The salad was easy to make but full of flavor, something that improved with time as it sat in the fridge overnight. The tang of vinegar and sweetness of onion created a perfect harmony of balance and belief. It was light yet powerful, simple yet layered with heritage. At church dinners and family gatherings, you'd always see a bowl of it, glistening, colorful, and made from the heart. It was the quietest dish on the table, but the one with the loudest blessing. Candied yams with orange zest and nutmeg were pure Christmas joy baked in a dish. The sweet potatoes glowed like amber under their syrup, each slice soft enough to melt under your fork. Butter, sugar, and spices blended together to make a glaze so rich it felt like celebration itself. The orange zest lifted it all, adding brightness to the deep sweetness, while nutmeg brought warmth that lingered long after the last bite. It was a dessert in disguise, yet a staple side in every holiday meal. Grandmothers made it by instinct, never measuring, just feeling when it was right. The bubbling syrup in the oven was a soundtrack to the season. It was served proudly next to ham, greens, and dressing, a dish that said abundance, even when times were tight. Candied yams were the taste of love, memory, and care baked into one perfect pan. When people talk about soul food, this is what they mean. Sweetness born from struggle, flavor carried through generations, and joy that glows from within. Okra and tomato stew brought the warmth of West Africa straight to the American kitchen. Thick, tangy, and rich with spices, it was food meant to comfort body and spirit. The okra thickened the stew naturally, creating that signature texture that some loved and others teased, but everyone respected. Tomatoes, onions, and garlic simmered until their flavors blended into something both bright and deep. For many families, this dish connected them to a history that reached far beyond American soil. It was a link between past and present, memory and meal. Cooked slow in iron pots, it filled the house with an aroma that could stop conversations. Served with rice or cornbread, it soaked up every drop of flavor and told stories older than the holiday itself. It was a side dish, yes, but it was also history, survival, and celebration stirred into one pot. Every spoonful carried pride, patience, and the taste of home that no recipe could ever quite capture again. Rice and gravy was more than a side dish. It was a quiet masterpiece that turned simple meals into feasts. On Christmas Day, it soaked up every drop of flavor from roasted turkey, baked chicken, or smothered pork chops. The gravy was never just one thing. It was the story of the meal itself, made from the drippings, broth, and love left behind in the pan. It was stirred until smooth, seasoned until right, and poured over rice that had been fluffed to perfection. In many homes, rice and gravy was the glue that brought the plate together, the taste that made everything else make sense. Children waited for that rich, silky spoonful that tied meat, greens, and bread into one complete bite. No one measured anything. It was all by memory and instinct. A little more flour, a splash more broth, a taste, and a nod. That was how gravy was born. For families that had little, it was a way to make the meal stretch. For those who had plenty, it was still the favorite part of the meal. Rice and gravy held history in its smooth texture, the creativity of making luxury from leftovers and turning every dinner into something worthy of thanks. Field peas and snap beans were a southern duo that spoke of harvest and home. They simmered together in big pots, filling kitchens with a fragrance that meant Christmas had truly arrived. Field peas brought hearty depth, while snap beans added freshness and bite. The dish was simple: peas, beans, onions, and a piece of smoked meat for seasoning, but it tasted like abundance. It carried the memory of summer fields into winter homes, a reminder of the labor and love behind every meal. For Black families in the South, growing and cooking these together was both survival and pride. When shared during holidays, they symbolized community, everyone bringing something from their garden or pantry to the table. This side dish was rich in flavor and meaning, nourishing both body and spirit. It reflected the way people made the most of what the earth gave them, combining ingredients that grew side by side. The sound of the simmering pot was steady and comforting, a rhythm as old as the land itself. Few make it today, but for those who remember, the taste is like coming home again. Homemade rolls with butter-brush tops were a gift of patience and warmth. Before store-bought bread took over, these rolls were kneaded by hand, rising slow in the corner of a warm kitchen. The scent of baking bread was enough to make children hover near the oven, waiting for the first golden batch to come out. Butter melted and shimmered on their tops, soaking into the soft, pillowy dough beneath. They weren't just sides, they were gestures of care. Each roll meant time spent, hands working, hearts focused on family. During Christmas dinners, baskets of these rolls were passed around before the meal even began, the first thing to break the silence of waiting. People used them to scoop up gravy, wipe clean plates, or cradle a bit of leftover ham. They tasted like home, like love that was made visible in food. No fancy machines, no shortcuts, just flour, yeast, water, and skill born from generations of cooks who knew exactly how dough should feel. The first bite was always soft, buttery, and slightly sweet, the kind of comfort that could make any holiday perfect. Stuffed bell peppers with rice and ground beef were the kind of side that turned heads when it hit the table. Bright and hearty, they stood tall among casseroles and greens, filled with flavor and pride. Inside the tender peppers was a mixture of rice, onions, tomatoes, and seasoned beef, a recipe that stretched a little meat into something plentiful. For African American cooks, this dish was a testament to resourcefulness. It showed how creativity could make even modest ingredients taste rich. During Christmas, they were baked until soft and bubbling, the aroma filling every corner of the home. Some added a touch of cheese on top. Others stuck to the basics, letting the natural sweetness of the pepper shine. They were filling and balanced, the perfect bridge between a main dish and a side. The bright colors made the table glow, and the taste made everyone smile. These peppers were a small luxury, proof that even in lean years, celebration could still look beautiful. It was food with color, heart, and soul, crafted from care and imagination. Fried green tomatoes were a holiday secret, saved for the most special meals of the year. Sliced thick, dredged in cornmeal, and fried until golden, they carried that perfect balance of tart and crisp. The sizzle in the skillet was a sound of joy, promising something special was on the way. Each slice was crunchy on the outside, tender on the inside, and full of flavor that only fresh tomatoes could bring. Before refrigeration and modern convenience, cooks learned to use what they had, and green tomatoes meant nothing went to waste. At Christmas, they were served as a treat, often with a little salt or homemade dipping sauce on the side. They added brightness to a heavy table, a pop of Southern spirit next to rich meats and gravies. These tomatoes told a story of creativity and thrift turned into celebration. They reminded everyone that soul food was about making beauty from the everyday. When you bit into one, you tasted the wisdom of generations who made flavor where others saw only scraps. Scalloped potatoes with onion and cheese were baked love layered in a pan. Thin slices of potato, creamy sauce, and sharp cheese melted together until bubbling and golden brown. The edges crisped while the center stayed soft and rich, creating that perfect mix of textures. For Christmas dinners, this dish brought comfort and elegance at once. It was often made in heavy glass or cast iron dishes, still warm when placed on the table. The onions gave sweetness, the cheese brought depth, and the potatoes carried it all with quiet strength. Families would crowd around, spoons clinking against the sides as they reached for seconds. It was the kind of dish that didn't need announcing. Its smell spoke first. African American home cooks added their own touches, a bit of paprika, a sprinkle of garlic, or a splash of evaporated milk for richness. It was a recipe passed quietly between generations, unchanged because it was already perfect. When it came out of the oven, the whole house smelled like warmth, patience, and tradition. Sweet potato cornbread was where bread met dessert and soul met comfort. Its deep orange color glowed like evening light, and its flavor walked the line between savory and sweet. Mashed sweet potatoes blended with cornmeal, sugar, and butter to create a moist, golden loaf that could stand on its own. For Christmas dinners, it was the first thing to disappear from the table. Each bite carried the flavor of the earth and the warmth of the kitchen, a sweet echo of care and creativity. In many families, this cornbread replaced plain loaves. It was softer, richer, and somehow more personal. The smell alone could bring everyone to the table before the food was even called. Served with a pat of butter or a drizzle of honey, it was comfort in its purest form. It showed how Black cooks blended tradition with imagination, always finding new ways to turn simple ingredients into something unforgettable. One slice could make you feel full, not just in stomach, but in spirit. Stewed cabbage with onions and vinegar was a dish that hugged the cold right out of the winter. It was simple. Cabbage sliced fine, simmered with onions, salt, pepper, and a touch of vinegar to wake everything up. As it cooked, the kitchen filled with a tangy, savory aroma that felt like family itself. The steam rose from the pot like an invitation to gather. On Christmas tables, it sat proudly beside roast meats and cornbread, balancing the richness with its clean, bright flavor. It reminded everyone that good food did not need excess, only care. The vinegar gave it life, cutting through the heaviness of the season's indulgence, while the onions made it sweet and familiar. For many Black families, this dish came from memories of gardens and preservation, of using what the land gave with gratitude. It was not fancy, but it was honest, and that honesty made it beautiful. Every spoonful tasted like warmth, comfort, and the wisdom of making the most out of what you have. Corn pudding casserole was the soft, golden heart of the Christmas table. Creamy, buttery, and rich, it was both side dish and comfort dessert. Made with corn, milk, eggs, and sugar, it baked into something between custard and cornbread. The smell when it came out of the oven was enough to stop conversations. Every family had their own way. Some added vanilla, others a pinch of nutmeg, but all poured love into it. The sweetness wasn't overpowering. It was just enough to feel like home. It was a dish that held history, born from the cornfields of the South and passed down through generations who made do with what they had. For many, it was the definition of made from scratch, the kind of food that held you steady through good times and hard ones alike. On Christmas, it brought warmth to every plate, spooned next to hams, greens, and dressing. Its texture, soft, silky, a little firm at the edges, was like the meal's closing note, something everyone remembered long after the table was cleared. Baked lima beans with molasses were slow-cooked comfort in its purest form. The beans simmered until creamy, sweetened gently with molasses, and just enough spice to make them feel festive. This dish came from old Southern kitchens where ovens stayed warm all day, filling the house with the deep scent of sugar and smoke. It was hearty, simple, and deeply satisfying. Each bite tasted like time itself, slow, patient, and full of purpose. For African American families, this recipe carried echoes of tradition, tracing back to the ways ancestors turned basic staples into meals of strength. Molasses gave the beans a dark, glossy finish and a sweetness that felt like hope. At Christmas, they balanced the salty hams and roasted meats perfectly. It was a dish meant to fill bellies and hearts alike, the kind of food that stayed with you long after you left the table. Few people make it now, but those who do know its secret. The slower it cooks, the better it gets, just like family, faith, and love itself. Green beans with smoked turkey tails were a dish that showed how even the simplest vegetables could carry deep love. On Christmas Day, the pot would simmer for hours, the air rich with that smoky, savory scent that could make anyone feel at home. Turkey tails weren't fancy meat. They were the kind of ingredient families learned to make magic from. The beans soaked up all that flavor, turning tender and rich with every stir. Cooking them was slow work, but it was the kind that filled a kitchen with laughter and memory. For many African American families, this dish was an evolution, a shift from ham hocks or salt pork to turkey, adapting with the times but keeping the same soul. The pot of green beans was more than food, it was part of the ritual. Every aunt and grandmother had their own method. Some added onions, others a touch of vinegar, all knowing that what mattered most was patience. When the lid finally lifted, steam and history rose together. This was a dish built on resourcefulness and tradition, where thrift met tenderness and turned into something unforgettable. Sweet potato soufflé with toasted pecans was the dish that brought a touch of grace to the Christmas table. It shimmered like gold in its casserole dish, fluffy as a cloud, yet rich as any dessert. The base was simple: mashed sweet potatoes, sugar, eggs, and a hint of cinnamon, but the topping transformed it. Toasted pecans and brown sugar crisped into a caramel layer that cracked softly under a spoon. It was the kind of side that made guests lean forward and hum with delight after the first bite. African American cooks made it to show pride in skill and patience, turning something humble into something elegant. Soufflés required care, the right whisk, the perfect timing, and a steady hand. But when it came out just right, it was a masterpiece of both texture and taste. The smell alone could warm the coldest winter morning. Every spoonful felt like a celebration of comfort and refinement all at once. In homes where food was love made visible, this soufflé was a quiet triumph, proof that tradition and artistry could live on the same plate. Okra gumbo with crab or sausage was a dish steeped in the rhythm of the coast, where Christmas meant gathering everyone around one big pot. The roux, that dark, glossy base, was stirred slowly, the kind of stirring that tested patience but rewarded every second. Into it went onions, peppers, garlic, and that unmistakable okra that thickened the stew naturally. Crab added sweetness, sausage added spice, and together they made something far bigger than their parts. Gumbo was a story of connection, of West African roots, southern soil, and the Creole kitchen's genius for making everything work in harmony. Every spoonful carried generations of adaptation and pride. For families along the Gulf and in southern cities, gumbo wasn't just food, it was ceremony. You could taste the coast in every bite, the memory of labor and laughter mixed into the broth. Served over rice, it filled both stomach and spirit. At Christmas, it meant family had arrived and celebration had truly begun. Even the smallest bowl held history, faith, and flavor that refused to fade. Rice dressing with chicken livers was rich, aromatic, and deeply southern in every way. The scent of it cooking was enough to fill a home with comfort, onions sizzling, rice toasting, and spices blooming in the pan. This dish had roots in Louisiana's Creole kitchens, where no part of the chicken went to waste. The livers gave the rice a deep, earthy flavor, balanced by herbs like thyme, sage, and parsley. It was a dish born from frugality but perfected through love. At Christmas, it sat beside hams and roasts, adding warmth and substance to every plate. Each family had their own variation. Some used giblets, others ground meat, but the heart of the dish stayed the same. It was a blend of resourcefulness and elegance, turning scraps into something rich enough to feel like a feast. The rice soaked up the juices of the pan, binding everything together in savory unity. It was more than a side dish. It was a bridge between old-world tradition and new-world joy. Every spoonful carried flavor, memory, and the quiet pride of making something so simple taste so profound. Fried corn with peppers and onions was sunshine in a skillet. Known as creamed corn from the cob, it was made fresh from sweet kernels shaved by hand, not poured from a can. Butter sizzled, onions softened, and peppers added color and sweetness that caught the eye before the first bite. The corn was fried slowly, releasing its natural sugars until it thickened into a glossy, creamy dish that could hold its own beside any roast. This side spoke to care, the act of taking time to cut each ear and stir it patiently until perfect. It was a dish that showed how something simple could become extraordinary through attention and love. During Christmas, it was a favorite for its brightness, a little taste of summer hidden inside winter. The sweetness of the corn met the salt of the butter in a perfect balance that made even the youngest family members quiet for a moment. Its flavor was gentle, but its meaning was powerful, a reminder that the best meals come from what is grown, shared, and made with intention. Cabbage and apple slaw was the crisp relief every heavy meal needed. It wasn't flashy or loud, just finely sliced cabbage, tart apples, and a light dressing that tied it all together. The crunch broke through the richness of ham, turkey, and gravy, refreshing every bite with a burst of brightness. For many Black families, this dish came from a blend of Southern and Northern traditions, a simple, healthy balance that stretched the holiday feast. Some made it creamy with mayonnaise, others left it vinegary and sharp, each version carrying its maker's personality. The apples gave it sweetness, the vinegar gave it soul, and the cabbage held it steady. It was one of those sides that reminded everyone that the table needed contrast, not just comfort. You could feel its purpose. It cleared the palate, lifted the spirit, and added color to the spread. The sound of the first bite was always a crisp snap, followed by smiles. It was humble, Yes, but its freshness made the whole meal feel alive. Pineapple and cheese casserole was one of those curious dishes that made the mid-century South unforgettable. It sounded odd to some, sweet pineapple baked with sharp cheddar and buttered crumbs, but to those who knew, it was divine. This casserole walked the perfect line between savory and sweet, the tang of pineapple melting into the richness of cheese. It was both side and dessert, both surprise and tradition. For Christmas tables, it added a golden shimmer that made guests curious and delighted. Black Southern cooks took this quirky recipe and gave it soul, balancing flavors with a precision that only experience could bring. Each forkful carried creamy warmth, followed by a burst of brightness that cut through the heaviness of the feast. It paired beautifully with ham or roast meats, turning every bite into a layered celebration of contrast. Though it's rare today, the casserole once symbolized holiday creativity, how home cooks dared to mix flavors and make something uniquely their own. It was proof that even the strangest combinations could become comfort when made with care. Hoppin John, black-eyed peas and rice cooked together, was more than food. It was a prayer, a dish tied to hope, fortune, and the faith that each new year would bring better days. Though it appeared on Christmas tables, it truly shone when December turned to January, symbolizing luck and abundance. The peas stood for coins, the rice for plenty, and the greens often served alongside for wealth. But deeper than superstition, Hoppin John was about heritage. It carried the legacy of West African rice traditions, the survival of enslaved cooks who made nourishment from the barest means. Cooked slow with onions, peppers, and sometimes smoked meat, it filled homes with a scent that felt like gratitude itself. Served in one big bowl for sharing, it invited togetherness. Every scoop was a wish passed from hand to hand. In its simplicity, it told a powerful truth. Hope, like rice, multiplies when shared. Potato salad with celery seed and pickle relish was the cold crown of every holiday table. Every aunt, every grandmother had her own version, and no two were ever quite the same. Some used boiled eggs, others a touch of mustard, but all understood the balance, creamy, tangy, and perfectly chilled. The celery seed gave it an earthy warmth, while the relish added sweetness that brightened every bite. Made the night before, it sat covered in the fridge, flavors deepening overnight. By the time it was served, it was magic in a bowl. At Christmas, it paired beautifully with hams and roasts, cooling the richness of the meal with quiet confidence. It was one of those dishes that told a story of care, peeling, chopping, mixing, and tasting until it felt just right. Families measured skill by who had the best potato salad, a loving rivalry that carried on year after year. It was more than food. It was family identity, pride, and memory served cold. Cracklin cornbread was the kind of side that made noise before it even hit your plate, that satisfying sizzle as it came out of the skillet. Bits of crispy pork skin hid inside the golden crumb, adding bursts of flavor and crunch in every bite. It was born from thrift, from the practice of using every part of the hog, but it became a delicacy through love and skill. The batter was simple: cornmeal, eggs, milk. Yet what made it special was the cracklins, those little treasures of fat and crisp. During Christmas, it symbolized abundance, a sign that nothing had gone to waste. It was the taste of self-sufficiency, of knowing how to make do and make it delicious. When served warm with a pat of butter, the smell alone could stop conversations. Each bite told a story of generations who knew that resourcefulness and joy often came from the same place. Cracklin cornbread was proof that even scraps could shine when cooked with care and soul. Molasses taffy pulls weren't just treats. They were memories made by hand. In kitchens that smelled of sugar and spice, families would gather around the stove to watch syrup boil into a sticky amber ribbon. When the time came, everyone, from children to grandparents, greased their hands and began the pull. The warm molasses stretched and shone under the light, laughter filling the room as strings of candy stuck to fingers and aprons. This wasn't about perfection, it was about participation. In a time before store-bought sweets, taffy pulls were as much a social ritual as they were dessert making. They turned cold winter nights into community gatherings, moments when hardship took a backseat to joy. The final product was glossy, chewy, and just a little uneven, like life itself. Molasses taffy pulls weren't about what you ate at the end, but about what you made together along the way. Watermelon rind stew reflects the creativity and endurance of people forced to survive on the edges of the plantation food system. The sweet red fruit was usually reserved for those in the owner's household, but the pale green rind, often thrown away, became a valuable ingredient for the enslaved cooks who transformed scraps into nourishment. Strips of rind were simmered slowly with onions, garden herbs, and whatever seasoning could be gathered or traded, creating a mellow broth rich in minerals and gentle sweetness. This practice traveled forward in time, inspiring the pickled watermelon rind that remains a hallmark of Southern home kitchens today. The dish is more than a recipe. It is a record of resilience, showing how African culinary knowledge turned waste into sustenance and flavor. In modern celebrations of African American foodways, watermelon rind pickles and stews continue to honor those who preserved health and dignity through skilled cooking even when denied basic freedom. Country fried steak with cream gravy provided hearty satisfaction at community cafeterias and gatherings where activists and neighbors met to share meals and stories. Thin cuts of beef were pounded for tenderness, dredged in seasoned flour, and pan-fried until crisp and golden. A quick gravy made from the flavorful pan drippings and fresh milk was poured generously over the steak, turning an inexpensive cut of meat into a feast. The comforting combination of crunchy coating and creamy sauce made this dish a dependable favorite for feeding hardworking families and traveling organizers alike. Its affordability and rich taste reflected the creativity of Southern cooks who transformed simple ingredients into something truly satisfying. Country fried steak with cream gravy remains a beloved memory of gatherings where conversation and courage flowed as freely as the warm gravy that blanketed every plate, proving that good food can both comfort and inspire in equal measure. Mustard green stew was a bitter yet nourishing dish that carried families through hard seasons, simmered slowly with fatback or drippings to soften the strong taste. These greens were one of the most dependable crops in the South, thriving in poor soil and often lasting through the cooler months when other vegetables had failed. Housewives would cook large pots of mustard greens, letting them stew for hours until tender, often serving them with cornbread on the side to soak up the flavorful potlikker. Children did not always love the taste, but they ate it because it filled their stomachs and offered vitamins they badly needed. The bitterness reminded people of the harsh times they were enduring, yet the comfort of the warm stew reminded them of the strength in their communities. It was not fancy or celebrated, but it became a dish of survival, passed from one generation to the next. Mustard green stew stood as proof that even in scarcity, the land still gave enough to keep people going through Jim Crow hardships. Candied yams with burnt sugar crust could make a whole house stop talking. Thick slices of yam bathed in butter and brown sugar until the edges bubbled and caramelized into dark glass. The smell alone was enough to draw everyone to the kitchen door. It was a dish that glowed like amber, glistening beneath oven light. Each bite balanced soft sweetness with smoky depth, melting into the tongue like memory. Families made it with precision, layering yams just right so the syrup reached every corner. Some added nutmeg or orange zest, others just let the sugar speak. It was often the first dish to disappear, scraped clean before dessert was served. No holiday table felt right without it. Candied yams weren't just sweet, they were sacred, connecting generations through the simplest acts of care. When the crust cracked beneath a spoon, it was music, the sound of warmth returning home. Homemade yeast rolls were simple perfection. They rose patiently on countertops covered in dish towels, their dough soft as clouds and fragrant with yeast. When they came out of the oven, golden brown and brushed with butter, they melted in your mouth. No Christmas table was complete without them. They were served in baskets lined with linen, passed around with smiles and "Save one for me, please." Each roll represented time, hours of kneading, rising, and baking, and yet they disappeared in minutes. The recipe was often unwritten, taught by touch. The dough must feel alive, springing back beneath your fingers. Families measured not with cups, but with instinct, and somehow it always worked. Paired with ham or gravy, they soaked up every bit of goodness from the plate. Their scent alone could bring people to the table before grace was even said. Homemade yeast rolls were the soul of hospitality, a soft reminder that even the simplest foods could bring a family together. Simmered kudzu greens were a dish of last resort, born from the invasive vine that covered southern fields. When other crops failed or money was gone, families gathered the tender leaves and boiled them like collards. The greens were bitter but edible, providing vitamins and a sense of fullness in desperate times. Housewives seasoned them with fatback or drippings when they had them, softening the harsh flavor into something more palatable. Children rarely welcomed them, but they ate because food was food. Kudzu had overtaken much of the land, smothering trees and fences, but survival meant turning even a pest into a meal. The dish became a quiet symbol of resilience, showing how nothing was wasted when hunger pressed hard. Though kudzu greens are almost unheard of today, they once kept families alive in lean seasons, proving that the line between weed and resource was thin. They were survival on a plate, pulled from the very vines that swallowed the southern landscape. Macaroni and cheese baked Southern style turned a simple pasta dish into a rich, crowd-pleasing comfort food that became a star at Sunday dinners and church gatherings. Elbow macaroni was boiled just until tender, then layered with sharp cheddar cheese, butter, and a creamy milk sauce before baking in a hot oven until the top bubbled and browned. The result was a casserole with a crisp crust and a gooey interior that drew children and adults alike. Volunteers preparing meals for activists found it perfect for feeding large groups, as it could be made ahead and served easily from big pans. The familiar flavor and golden color lifted spirits at planning meetings and post-March celebrations. Macaroni and cheese offered a taste of indulgence during difficult days, proving that comfort food has the power to unite and sustain. Its enduring popularity reflects the way Southern cooks elevated everyday ingredients into something special, making each gathering a little brighter and every plate a reminder of home. Sweet potato pudding was the kind of dish that didn't need decoration to feel like a celebration. Smooth, golden, and kissed with cinnamon, it was a comfort that stretched back through generations of Black Southern kitchens. Sweet potatoes were always within reach, cheap, hearty, and capable of transforming into something beautiful with just a bit of sugar and spice. Families baked this pudding in worn enamel pans, filling homes with the scent of nutmeg and roasted sweetness. It was often the last dish into the oven, made from what was left after the pies and breads were done, proof that even scraps could be turned into love. It was served warm, usually after church on Christmas Day, when everyone was dressed in their Sunday best and laughter spilled across the table. The texture was soft and custard-like, every bite melting on the tongue and bringing quiet contentment. Sweet potato pudding was a dessert that carried dignity. It didn't pretend to be fancy, but it didn't need to. It was enough to fill the heart, not just the plate. Smothered pork chops filled kitchens with the deep aroma of onions and slow-cooked meat, a scent that promised comfort and community after long days of organizing and marching. Thick pork chops were first seasoned and lightly browned in a heavy skillet, then simmered beneath a blanket of sliced onions and homemade broth until tender enough to cut with a fork. The onion gravy thickened as it cooked, blending with the natural juices of the meat to create a rich sauce that soaked perfectly into warm rice or cornbread. Families gathered after evening church meetings to share this dish, drawing strength from both its hearty flavor and the fellowship it encouraged. Activists who traveled from town to town during the civil rights era often found this meal waiting in church basements where volunteers cooked with love and quiet determination. Smothered pork chops stand as a reminder that food nourished not just the body but the spirit of a movement that demanded endurance and unity in every step forward toward justice and freedom. Hominy grits with drippings turned the simplest of grains into a sustaining dish, transforming a plain pot of corn hominy into something rich and hearty. Families would boil the dried kernels until soft, creating a thick base that was filling on its own, but it was the addition of leftover pork or chicken fat that made it truly nourishing. The saved grease gave flavor, richness, and much-needed calories to a food that otherwise carried little beyond bulk. Housewives prized grits because they stretched easily and could feed a large family with very little cost. Children grew up with bowls of it, steaming hot and comforting, often for breakfast, but just as often at supper. The dish reflected the reality of Jim Crow life, where nothing went to waste and every scrap had to earn its place. Hominy grits with drippings showed how frugality shaped meals into traditions, feeding bodies while reminding families that survival depended on using every bit of what was on hand. If one of these dishes stirred a memory, share it below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep the soul of these meals alive.